Gotta go to Titan Missile today. So, see you there, everyone. I'll drive this. Interesting place. I'll see you inside, everyone. So this is about 25 miles from Tucson, Arizona. It's called Green Valley, Arizona, and off Highway 19. And it's about 50 miles from Nogales, right on the border of Arizona. See you inside. So it's open. It's Sunday. Hope so.
that viewing platform, the glass and the metal has been baking in the sun all morning. So if you lick your finger and put it on the glass and it's
I'm gonna film the movie.
This is Titan II, the largest and most powerful missile weapon system ever deployed by the United States. Titan II helped defend our country during the Cold War, from 1963 until 1986. Hello, and welcome to the Titan Missile Museum. This is Launch Complex 571-7. It was active for almost 20 years. When the Air Force decommissioned this complex in 1982, it invited the Arizona Aerospace Foundation to preserve the facilities for historical purposes. 571-7 was turned into a museum in part simply to preserve the missile and the complex as important artifacts of 20th century technology, but also in hopes that a knowledge of how it worked and why we needed it might give you a better understanding of the complexities of defending the United States and the awesome responsibilities of doing so with nuclear weapons. 571-7 also stands as a constant reminder that peace is never fully won. It is only kept from moment to moment. Titan II is the second generation of ICBMs used by the United States. The first ICBMs we used were the Atlas and the Titan I. Those were decent enough missiles, but they used liquid oxygen as the oxidizer in the propellants. Liquid oxygen is the best oxidizer you could ask for. The problem with liquid oxygen is that it's extremely cold and it boils away very quickly. That means you can't store it aboard the missile. You have to load it onto the missile right before you intend to launch. That can take a lot of time. And in a nuclear war, time is something you don't have very much of. Titan II solved that problem with the invention of storable propellants, two very exotic liquid chemicals, a fuel and an oxidizer. Stable enough, you could load them on board the missile down in the silo and let it sit there for years on end, waiting to go at a moment's notice. Because Titan II always had a full load of propellants on board, the response time was not 30 or 45 minutes. The response time was 58 seconds. That was a huge advantage of Titan II. But that huge advantage came with two huge disadvantages. One is that those exotic liquid propellants were extraordinarily toxic and needed to be handled with what amounted to moon suits, known officially as rocket fuel handler clothing outfits, or REFCOs for short. The other disadvantage is that the oxidizer was really only stable if you kept it at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If it got much warmer than 60, it would begin to boil inside the tanks of the missile. Trust me, this would be a bad thing. Now there's a third point about the propellants that's an advantage and a disadvantage all rolled up into one. That is, the propellants are hypergolic. What that means is that to launch the missile, all you have to do is mix those two liquids together, and they ignite spontaneously on contact with each other. The advantage is no complicated ignition system is required. The disadvantage is, suppose the missile springs a leak down in the silo and the chemicals mix accidentally. That would be a disaster. This is one of two platforms called hard stands that were used to actually load propellants onto the missile. This is the fuel hard stand. The oxidizer hard stand is on the other side of the complex. What they would do is bring a big tank truck in here full of fuel, hook up hoses, and offload the fuel onto this holding trailer. Then, they connect the holding trailer to the conditioning trailer. The job of the conditioning trailer is to heat or cool the propellant until it's at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Once they have it at the right temperature, they flow it down through those big pipes into the first and second stage of the missile below. That's all there is to it. I think the most remarkable thing about the engines are the enormous numbers you can throw around when you talk about them. For example, the sign says the first stage generates 430,000 pounds of thrust. Now, I don't know about you, but pounds of thrust is not a unit of measure that makes much sense to me. So I like to think of the power of the engine in more familiar terms. Think of the power of the first stage as being about equal to 2 747s running at full throttle. Now, first stage burns for only 2.5 minutes. In other words, the entire working life of the first stage is 2.5 minutes, and then it's done forever. But in 2.5 minutes, the first stage consumes almost 25,000 gallons of propellants. That's 160 gallons a second. So the gas mileage is not very good. It goes really fast to make up for it. Take a look around the back, the top of the engine really, since this end was pointed up when it was attached to the missile. And you can see the intake lines for the fuel and the oxidizer on both segments of the engine. Originally, these lines were fitted with valves called pre-valves or butterfly valves. You can see how butterfly valves work in this cutaway. This butterfly valve is different than the others. It has a lock on it that prevents it from being opened until a secret code can be entered in a switch down in the control center. This engine has no off switch. Once it leaves the silo, there is no stopping it. It just goes and goes and goes, literally until it runs out of gas. So 2.5 minutes after launch, the propellants run out. The first stage is separated from the missile and goes falling back to Earth. At this point, the missile is something like 45 miles high and 45 miles north of here. So then the second stage kicks in and burns for about 3 minutes. It does have an off switch. The guidance system will shut it down at just the right instant. Then the second stage is separated. All that remains then is the RV, the bomb on board. Important point. Total flight time of the missile from launch to target destruction is something like 30 or 35 minutes, give or take. Of that time, only the first 5.5 minutes is powered flight. Everything else is ballistic flight. Ballistic just means that the RV is traveling the same kind of a path as a bullet fired from a gun. And just like a bullet, the RV is essentially coasting. So the RV coasts up to about 600 miles of altitude and does a ballistic free fall into the target. It's accurate enough that from 6,000 miles away, we can drop the bomb into a circle less than a mile in diameter. Wow. When the complex was operational, we didn't have any guards roaming around up here with M16s, waiting to shoot it out with the bad guys. All the security for the complex was handled by these curious scoop-shaped gizmos called TPSIs. The TPSIs are a kind of Doppler radar system, very similar to police radar, and these big scoops are actually antennas. Here's the setup. Say that this is the silo. The silo door fits on top, about like so, slides off in this direction, and there's a pair of TPSIs at each corner of the silo door. What they do is send a radar beam between these TPSIs, like so. Together, they form an electronic fence around the silo. Anything that penetrates the beam will set off an alarm down in the control center. Now, the crew won't come up to see what the problem is. They just get on the phone with the Wing Command Post. The Wing Command Post will dispatch the security police, and they arrive in a little Jeep. Just like this one, with M16s in hand, to have a look around. This is the primary alert system antenna. It was the main radio system on the complex. It kept the crew in touch with the Wing Command Post and with the other launch sites around Tucson. It was the primary antenna on which the crew would get the message to launch. Because it was such an important system, and because the tower could easily be blown down in a nearby nuclear strike, this system had not one, but 2 identical backup antennas, both stored safely underground in their own hardened silos. Punch a button in the control center, the lid pops open, and the antenna is raised from underground. The crew could also receive the order to launch from the Airborne Command Post through this antenna. This is a UHF semi-hardened antenna. UHF means ultra-high frequency. During the Cold War, the Air Force had an airplane flying 24 hours a day. It was called Looking Glass, and it acted as the Airborne Command Post. If the ground-based command posts were destroyed, the order to launch could be sent from Looking Glass. Getting into the underground portion of the complex requires a simple but extremely secure procedure. Here's how it works. You and your crew pull up to the main gate. Get out, pick up the gate phone, and call the control center. This is the first of 4 phone calls you need to make. The control center wants your name, rank, crew number, and a few other details, but basically this phone call amounts to, "Hi, we're here." The control center will push a button on the console down there. It'll unlock the gate, roll the gate open, drive in, close the gate behind you, park right over here. While the rest of your crew begins an inspection of the top side, you go down to the bottom of these stairs and pick up a second phone. Hi, this is Chuck at the outer portal door. Thank you. This is Chuck, ready to code in. Okay, Sierra, Whiskey, Delta, Alpha, Bravo, November. Very good, thank you. I want you to know a little about the history of the Cold War. It's not difficult to understand what went on here and why. The history of Titan II begins with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are the most powerful and destructive weapons ever devised. Nuclear weapons made it possible to wipe out entire cities with a single blow. The horrifying efficiency of nuclear weapons changed the basic thinking about how wars might be fought. Unlike the years-long conflicts of World Wars I and II, World War III might be over in less than 90 minutes. And more frightening still was the knowledge that there is no defense against nuclear weapons. Because the actual use of nuclear weapons would be so devastating, the U.S. nuclear missile program was designed not so much to fight a nuclear war, but to prevent one from ever starting. The concept is called peace through deterrence, and it depends on two important points. First, that the enemy understands that we'll use our missiles only to retaliate. And second, that the enemy understands that if they strike us and manage to destroy most or all of our country, that we can still retaliate with enough firepower to destroy most or all of their country. This threat of mutual annihilation, referred to by military planners as mutual assured destruction, or MAD, was the driving force behind peace through deterrence. The Cold War was essentially a political and economic struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. Each believed the other was bent on world domination. With the invention of the atomic bomb in 1945 and the hydrogen bomb just a few years later, both sides began stockpiling nuclear weapons in what became an arms race, amassing ever more powerful bombs and the bombers to deliver them. Then, in 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. This 184-pound satellite stunned the world, not because it was the world's first artificial satellite, but because it meant the Soviets appeared to have the ability to deliver a nuclear bomb with a missile. Unlike bombers, which took hours to reach their targets, a bomb delivered with a missile could make the trip in little more than 30 minutes. Then, in October 1962, we discovered the Soviets had secretly installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the Florida coast. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of an all-out nuclear war. Titan II was born of our nation's deepest fears. Not only that an attack on our country could bring about an end to our way of life, but could bring about an end to the world as we know it. Through much of the last half of the 20th century, the concept of peace through deterrence kept the Cold War from turning hot. This is Chuck at Blast Door 6. Okay, thanks. We're in. Titan II was the largest and most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile ever deployed by the United States. It stood 103 feet tall, 10 feet in diameter, and carried a single, very large hydrogen bomb. 54 Titan II missiles were installed at 3 locations in the U.S. There were 18 each in Little Rock, Arkansas, Wichita, Kansas, and here in Tucson, Arizona. The missile sites were buried deep underground, hardened against the effects of nuclear blast, heat, and radiation.
steel-reinforced concrete walls, some as thick as 8 feet, and massive 3-ton blast doors protected both missile and crew from the ravages of a nuclear explosion.
It's a complex operation, watching over a Titan II missile. Still, on a day-to-day basis, it only took 4 people to keep the place running. Of course, if something serious went wrong, there were hundreds of highly trained specialists back at the base who could be here in as little as 30 minutes. The crew consisted of 4 people, 2 officers and 2 enlisted. They pulled a 24-hour shift called an alert. The crew had a fairly busy schedule. Reports to write, logs to keep, messages to answer. And each time a new crew came on board, they had to do a complete inspection of the entire complex from top to bottom. They looked at everything. Pumps, fans, motors, gaskets, switches, gauges, you name it, every detail. And then 12 hours later, they did it all over again. Now, the crew is going to be here for a full 24 hours. So they need a place to relax, to eat, to sleep, maybe take a shower. And they can do that right upstairs in the crew's quarters. Nothing fancy up here. Spare bunk beds. And your basic kitchen. Up here in the crew's quarters was the only place you could ever be alone. Everywhere else in the complex, someone had to be with you all the time. You see the signs everywhere. No lone zone, SAC 2-man policy mandatory. There are 2 reasons for that policy: safety and security. Safety because there are a lot of ways to hurt yourself down here, and if you do get hurt, you want to make sure help is close at hand. Security because we had a nuclear weapon down here, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was on the up and up. So I watch you, and you watch me. 2-man policy. But up here in the crew's quarters, you could be alone. And this is where the crews would come to relax a little bit. They could read a magazine or a book. They could play a game of cards. They could even get something to eat. And people who could cook were highly prized as crew members. So between eating and sleeping and inspections and generally watching over the missile, the crew waited for messages from the wing command post. They were waiting for the message to launch their missile. They waited for more than 20 years, but the message never came. That's because of peace through deterrence, as provided by weapon systems like Titan II, and the pride and dedication of the Air Force men and women who worked in the Titan program. And all of them, we just like to say, well done. Enjoy your tour.
Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got any 6-footers in here? No 6-footers, so we don't need hard hats. Okay, I just want to remind you to don't touch anything down there and try to stay together in a nice unit so we can move through. I think we're probably ready to go on because you had a briefing, didn't you, before this movie? Okay, so let's get going. My friend Colton is going to be safety officer to help you with any problems that you may have down there. I'll be your tour guide.
I never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it.
And that was, those are open pit compromise. Anyway, so we're going to hear in a few minutes to the 4-person crew. You're coming up to that gate, you're driving in here. If somebody had been, when you came down here, you would have seen that closed. Do you think that you would have seen open doors? You really, when it came right down to it. But it was a very, you couldn't open this one unless you got it shut. You lock and you pull this door open. Now, do you think this is a pretty light? And inside are springs, and this technology is copied throughout this entire complex, and I'm going to be showing you that. The other thing that you see here is the slack in the lines. You see all these wrinkled lines here? Well, those conduits are designed to flex, and so the equipment underneath it won't pull out from the conduit if things are going up and down. Now, even these little indicator lights, if you follow my laser pointer, these status indicator lights are protected with tiny springs above them because they were deemed to be mission critical. So now we're going to go into the Launch Control Center. We're going to see even something more interesting. So that's okay. Please follow me into the LCC. All right, please come into this large area. And at people who would like to sit down can sit on the blue bench only. We don't have anybody with hard hats. If we did, I'd tell you can take them off. But again, anybody who wants to sit on the blue bench can do so. Now, let's pretend that you are the 4-person crew coming in here on your daily duty. Now, it's called an alert. It's like a shift of labor, of work. And you come in here, it's your labor shift, it's your work shift, and they called it going on alert. And you come in here, there are 4 of you, be a commander, deputy commander, and 2 technicians. And the commander is called the Missile Combat Crew Commander. It'd be a deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander, it'd be a ballistic missile analyst technician, and there would be a missile facilities technician. And those 2 enlisted people would generally have this area as their place of work in this particular room. However, those 4 people might be moving throughout the entire complex. 2-person rule, 2 people need to be together. Officer and enlisted need to be in this room. Upstairs, you can be alone. That's the crew quarter. That's where you can eat. That's where you can sleep. And that's where you can use the restroom. So you can be, okay. You know, it's very silent. But back in the day of operation, the equipment down below, especially the electric equipment, would be creating huge amounts of noises. And the big sound waves going throughout the thing. It'd be really hard to hear each other, even under normal speaking distance. So, I'm going to talk about the structure. You just came through a gap. There was a bridge right over here. Because this entire complex is supported by springs. 3 stories. You see any of those little tiny springs that we saw? No. What do you see? Great big huge springs. There's 8 of those things and the guards are getting shot. So think of this. Now we're under attack or we have an earthquake and the structure surrounding us is shaking. But this complex inside, this building inside is designed to withstand that shaking, and it would move much, much less than the structure around it. It's because of the bounce. Okay? And so in essence upstairs there's also some mechanisms that guard against this. These guard against that. There's approximately 18 inches of movement that might happen. And you might not spill your coffee, even under those circumstances, on this command console. Another, the air shaft up above. That's where the air comes through, and that's also the valve that cuts off the air in the case of a pressurized event. And that pressurized event could actually be the launch of our missile, it could actually be an attack, or it could be an intruder that breaks through the beam of the tipsy alarm upstairs. That shaft, way on the other side, is also doubles as an escape. So, and this is, remember, this is technically an Air Force, it's like a dashboard for your car. Very, excuse me, very important reflection of all of the functions of this entire complex right here in front of you. So this is communications. This is the targeting information. This is the launch sequence itself. These are missile indicators, and these are facility indicators. Now, your ballistic missile analyst technician would have the responsibility for monitoring all of the missile and the guidance systems, troubleshooting. The facility technician would be responsible for all this other stuff you see, all these pipes and tubes, air conditioning. What happens if the storm comes through? Well, we have backup system. There's a giant diesel generator on the 3rd level of the silo that will kick in within 1 minute. But down below we have 2 giant batteries that would then kick in instantly to provide power to the sensitive instruments that needed it. So we have battery plus a generator. Now, if the power came back, then your facility technician would manage all of that troubleshooting, and some of these technical manuals in this black cabinet would guide you to be successfully deactivated or unlocked in order to launch the missile. This is a very sophisticated security device that is attached to a latch on one of the butterfly valves, and this governs the flow of propellant into the engine. Remember in the movie, a hyperbolic reaction, meaning that oxidizer and fuel came together and provided an instant ignition? You know what oxidizer is needed? You know why that's needed in outer space? You need a car. Everybody has an internal combustion engine here? Somebody has an electric? Internal combustion, you need air. In outer space, they can't hear you scream. And you don't have any air. And so that's what the oxidizer is. And so these two elements come together, the fuel mixture and the oxidizer. But this lock, you can't see it, but there would be a lock on here, would prevent unauthorized or accidental launches of the missile. There's 7 dials of alphabetical characters. 16 choices on each of 6 dials. You have to get those right. If you do get them right, you press a button and you can start your launch. But you don't even have the combination. It's not in this room. It's not even in that red safe. We're going to talk about that red safe now. That's called the EWO safe. It's an emergency war order safe. And you and your deputy would have personal knowledge, memory. There's a variety of missile at a target, wherever that target is, where number 2 was. We didn't know where number 1 was, and we didn't know where number 3 was. Now what we have here is an acronym. That's different variables that can be loaded and changed.
One guy in the back and one guy in the front.
This is an original access door. The original access door was here without this sort of acrylic thing here, but this allowed access to the panels that would be lowered down hydraulically via this control mechanism, allowing technicians to do their work surrounding the missile. Now this is the launch duct. The missile silo is actually over there. This is like a small tube inside of a bigger tube. And the missile itself is an authentic missile. It is not the original missile. The original one was taken out of here. Of that key is what you want. You're going to turn it into a holding system. So you can get these ones. Turn and hold. Wait for that to be done. They are on. Let go. You now have just started the launch sequence. You're not stopping unless there is some start the point for this demonstration. The first light says what?
Why?
That means you got this combination correct. Number 2 means it says what? Battery exactly. This is 28 battery. Board. They're being supercharged. Only going to take 28 seconds. They're going to be autonomous now from the control center. They're not going to need... That means that in 19 seconds, that huge door has opened up, allowing the missile to take off. Then it also triggers the security alert. That's what that tells you. Guidance go. Verification of all remaining guidance. Fires in the hole. Next 4 seconds. So 58 seconds. Start with this. We just launched 9 megatons. Retaliatory weapons against the people who just did it to us. So, after you turn that key, what if the President of the United States called you and said, "Boo-boo, I made a mistake, I'm sorry." And so, there's 5.5 minutes of guidance, 5.5 of saying input, and about 30 minutes later, it's destination. Here, because we're running out of time, we're waiting for further orders. What the transporters didn't come through. We'd be trapped in here. But guess what? None of that ever happened because I'm please read the registration. Very good. Let's go see if that missile is still there. That's actually very quickly.
Alright, let's go to the next level.
In Texas. It was at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. And all the crews had to go there for training. It was brought here just for you. It is authentic in every other way, though. Never had a bomb, never had fuel. And it's number 10 on the assembly line. Talking fuel tank is what it is, because it's roughly 5% of that weight without the fuel in it. And it is very thin. And some of that skin, that aluminum skin, is no thicker than a dime in your pocket. I'd like to talk about these two pictures to finish up with our presentation. And that missile sits vertically on only 4 tiny little points down here on the thrust mount. Now this is flexible. What Captain Pam didn't know was that this structure supports the entire missile and is using 3-story tall springs as shock isolation. So that if the complex is designed to be flexible, allowing the missile to remain vertical, with the engine creating steam. Neil Armstrong in the Gemini program, he was up in this tiny little capsule at the tip of this thing, and he sent him around Earth using Titan II. So we had 40 years of value to the American people. It's really tremendous. And that brings me to the end of my discussion. But I want to take you up now to the top. If you have any questions, you can ask them at the top, okay? Neil Armstrong in the Gemini program, he was up in this tiny little capsule at the tip of this thing, and he sent him around Earth using Titan II. So we had 40 years of value to the American people. It's really tremendous. And that brings me to the end of my discussion. But I want to take you up now to the top. If you have any questions, you can ask them. You're free to go ahead and wander. And I like to...
Okay, so we're done with the tour, and okay, this is done. I'm gonna turn around outside. See this missile, Titan. turn to super bright. Security police. Big. So it's a strategic air command. Okay. See? Oh yeah, that's girl. Oh great, that purse helped a lot.
Stand in the
There's
sun
air
up
here.
here. Block some of it.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's better and clear. There you go. Hang on. I'm taking a video. It's really nice. Okay, we're done.